Hello again everybody, it's me, Sammy here, I'm Skullgirl back again, doing another response video, because these are fun to do. How are all of you doing? If you are well, leave me a comment below, let me know how you are. Yes, back doing a response video, because, there's a lot I want to say about this topic, because it's kind of tickled me fancy, like a lot of these things always do. So, this is a response to John Knowles, TFKnowlsy, Mr. Knowlsy himself. How are you doing, sir? And his let's see if I can find the video. The video is, of course, about talking about cartoons and how much they've changed in recent years and all that stuff. If you wanna watch the video, it's in the description bar below. If you want to respond to it, please, I would highly recommend that you respond to it. It's actually a really good discussion. So yeah, I'm just throwing my take on all this and how I feel about the whole recent change of cartoons in recent years and how that's kind of affected the game, as it were. Right. Where do I stand with the whole cartoons and how they've changed in recent years thing? Well, I don't know. It's a very interesting subject, talking about cartoons, because people have their own different take on how they feel about them. I mean, either you've grown out of them completely and you don't watch them as much anymore, or you still watch them no matter how old you get. And for me personally, cartoons, I think, are a big thing, will be a part of my life for a very long time. So I think with me and cartoons, there's a lot to discuss, and there's a lot to gain impact from. So let's start there. For me personally, when I was a kid, cartoons have been around for as long as I can remember. I mean, I was born in 1988, so I'm 30 now, and depending on when you're watching this, cartoons have been a big part of my life for as long as I can remember. Going so far back as the days of Cartoon Network, when I used to watch a lot of things like Looney Tunes and anything Hanna-Barbera related and all that, and reruns of cartoons from that era, the 30s and the 40s and the 60s and that sort of thing, and even going so far back as things from the 70s and the 80s and that sort of thing. Well, the 70s cartoons, I think, were just, I watched a few of them, but I was never really that deeply impacted by some of them. I remember watching things like Scooby-Doo and all the various different clones of that specific, teenage kids and dog thing, which has kind of become the copy of those cartoons from that era, which depending on your view on some of them, I mean, some of them are good, some of them are a bit disposable, but needless to say that Scooby-Doo was kind of the cartoon that kind of bought from Hanna-Barbera that really did permeate that specific category of cartoons that Hanna-Barbera made. Then as I got older, I think that with me and cartoons, as I got a little bit older, I then gradually moved to channels like Fox Kids, which that channel was pretty much how I got started into liking anime. So and with anime, I mean, you had a wide variety of things like Digimon, various reruns of cartoons like Ulysses 31, which was an 80s property. So, and even though that's sort of considered an anime, even though it's not, yeah. So there's that, and Flint the Time Detective and Monster Rancher and all that sort of thing, and even branching out to things like Sky One, where you had Pokemon early on in the day, and so yeah, I mean, it's and even moving on to that in my teen years, when I watched things like even then it was still anime, but it was still, I was watching things that even like adults would watch, like Spawn and stuff like that. So so I think with me in cartoons, they have been a huge part of my life, because I can remember being a kid at some point in my life, like most of us always were. We were all children at one point in our lives, and just waking up at the crack of dawn and watching, putting on the television and just like either running downstairs in the morning or Saturday morning and watching the cartoons. and, you know, just like being 7 years old, eating cereal, that sort of thing. Because like a lot of kids back then always used to do, and that was kind of that was the way things were back then. When you turn on the television, you move on to Cartoon Network or Fox Kids or whatever channel you were weaned on at that point in your life, and you would watch those shows and just be immediately pulled in by whatever it is that they were doing. And that was the good thing about cartoons back then, was they just showed what children would enjoy. And that's all. I mean, look at that any way you want, and kind of form your own opinion on how you feel about that. I mean, but so I mean, there really isn't much quality control in that motif. I mean, put on what children would enjoy and see if they'll enjoy it, and that's fine. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how cartoons were back then. And for me personally, weekends and the weekdays, it was always for me just running downstairs, turning on the television, and watching the Saturday morning cartoons. And as the years would go on, that would gradually fade away, and now that we live in the digital era, where television is now becoming an obsolete thing, and we live in an unparalleled access of streaming and Netflix and whatever else is online now, where you can find these shows and watch them in leaps and bounds, to the point where running downstairs and turning on the television to watch the Saturday morning cartoons and shove cereal in your mouth is becoming a distant memory. And there are literally millions upon millions of videos where people are talking about their nostalgia and how they feel about it. And for me in cartoons, I mean, I talked a little bit about my close impact with cartoons and how I experienced them growing up. But for the cartoons how they've changed in recent years, I mean, the 90s, the early 2000s, and today, the landscape now is a much different place than it was decades ago, for better or worse. And I don't know. It's a strange issue, because I have a lot of very mixed opinions about cartoons from today. I think I'll get onto this in a minute, but there really isn't much risk being taken involved now to really capture children's imagination and really get out a really good cartoon. Whereas now it's just a whole issue of let's just make something that everybody will enjoy and cater to everybody and pander to their needs, which I'm very indifferent towards, if I'm honest, because I mean, I'll talk about this in great length in a minute, but I mean, don't give people what they want, you give them what they need. And that's all I'll say until I get later into the video, but I mean, but where do I sit regarding how cartoons have evolved and how they've changed in recent years? Well, let's look at the depths, shall we, and see where we are. If you look at things like Disney, and if you look at things like Hanna-Barbera, and you look at things that were coming out around the 80s and the 90s and all that sort of thing, there's a wide variety of different cartoons that I think were made, or that I think are made, for different demographics who all want something. And granted, at the end of the day, a cartoon is a product to sell you something. So there's that. There's number one. Number two is the whole issue of how cartoons have changed in terms of diversity and how things have shifted somewhat in terms of what the subject is being talked about nowadays. And I haven't really got so much a problem with that. It's just how these days it's just kind of been forced into people's faces, and I think that we see too much of that. And there's never really a big there's never really a big attempt to make anything that harkens back to what we had decades ago. Instead, oh, let's just make something that's the same thing, which I don't know. I think with a lot of cartoons that have come and gone through the years, we've seen we've seen Hanna-Barbera and what they've done, and how that studio declined around the end of the century, and all that stuff. We've seen cartoons that were made to sell products like toys and all forms of merchandise. And granted, that's still there now. That's never going to change. That's still there now, but I mean, we're seeing a little bit less of that. And when you have any cartoon that's based on a toy franchise, that is, I wouldn't say it's the main focal point, but I mean, back in the 80s and 90s, that was like the thing. That was the big thing. Most cartoons back then in that from the 80s and 90s, those two decades, those 2 decades were a big part of toy merchandising, just making something to sell something, and I don't have a problem with that. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, whatever you're making, you want to make back something in return. So, with 80s cartoons, you had things like Transformers and Thundercats and all paraphernalia of things that were designed to sell toys and comics and all that sort of thing. And with the 90s, you still had that, but we were moving forward into animation. I think traditional animation was beginning to see a rapid decline, and we would see the evolution in CGI animation, which I have nothing against CGI animation, but I think it's been overshadowed. Sorry, it's not overshadowed. CGI is being used to overshadow traditional animation. So there's that. But in regards to the style and the concept of animation, how it's being programmed, how it's been programmed through the years, you've had cartoons that had these racy, nowadays I think will probably be considered to be borderline offensive phrases, which, you know, a child wouldn't understand, but an adult would get. I mean, if you were watching this with your family and they saw, I don't know, a racist depiction of a black person or something, and then you say, oh, you can't put this on, it's offensive. There's that. Of course, that's always the issue. But then, as time would go on, you would eventually see other shows do this kind of thing to a lesser degree. And now, I think that's all but been a distant memory now. I think that now, with animation being more mainstream, and with more focus on safe stuff, the whole offensive jokes, all that sort of thing, that's kind of taken a bit of a backseat, and I think that's going to remain that way. So, and I don't want to say I don't miss that, but at the same time, it's what gave the cartoon a bit more impact. And when a cartoon had something like that to say, whether the message was good or not, you can tell it was saying something that was intended to be a joke. So, and in regards to how cartoons have changed over the years, I mean, we've seen, you know, television and the rise of digital streaming media, and how that has been the big foreground layer at the moment with children's entertainment. How they've changed over the years is an entirely different issue, and what Knowlsy I think was mentioning really interestingly is that there are some cartoons today that I think are not really being challenging hard enough to really capture a child's imagination. And here's how I feel about all that. With how digital media is at the moment, with things like Netflix, I mean, okay, yeah, you've got a few game changers like Hilda, which is fantastic, and you should definitely go watch it. Hilda's one of those cartoons that I think is what children's entertainment today should be. That doesn't beat you over the head and doesn't talk down to you in a really stupid way. Which, you know, I think for children's entertainment, I think you want to be treated as an equal, not treated as a fucking idiot. Because I think that's the problem I think I feel with a lot of children's entertainment, is if it's saying something, it has to say something that is treating them like an equal and not treating them like they're stupid. And that's one of the interesting things about it. So But how things have changed over the years, and where we've seen the evolution and the de-evolution and the rise and fall. Sorry, the evolution and de-evolution of styles, the rise and fall of home media and television and online streaming and all that sort of thing. We've seen so many of these things change, and it's stunning, but at the same time, it's actually very daunting to see children's entertainment, I think, not challenge its viewers the way that it could. Because if you think about it, we live in an unparalleled access of wide variety of content. We have so many different streaming services. We have so many different various different forms of programming where you can find entertainment and watch it or read it or whatever. And either it's stuff from years gone by, or it's things that are currently being put out there now. And there's something to that I think is good, but at the same time, there's a lack of balance in children's entertainment at the moment, where and here's how I feel about it, and you can probably disagree with me on this if you want. And I've seen people discuss this in various topics, and I don't want to go deeper into it, because there are people that can say it far more eloquently than I can. But I think with children's entertainment, there's not enough balance. And what do I mean by that? See, back in the 80s and in the 90s, and even so much the early 2000s, when you used to see a wide variety of television shows that were cartoons that were aimed for kids, of course, you had like two halves. You had one half that was more domesticated, simple children's storytelling, which was a very I can't think of that many examples, but I mean, you know, simple domesticated television shows for kids, and that had either cute styles or anything, or subliminal messages, or anything like that. And this is, you know, pandering to, I won't say pandering, but I mean, this is what the Gen X generation had to grow up with. And, well, I say had to, I mean, they grew up with it whether they wanted to or not. And on the other half, you have the action side of things. So what do I mean by action? Well, let's look at the list. The action cartoons. G.I. Joe, Thundercats, Transformers, He-Man. And this falls into the whole category of cartoons that were designed to sell you a product. And I've got no problem with that. And that, I think, is really where the action side of things really began to capture children's imagination, where you see various characters go to other galaxies and meet other alien races and have big fights and get caught into big explosions and all that sort of thing. And that's kind of that I think is where the excitement is for children's cartoons. And in some cases that's still there, but it's there very faintly. And in the 80s that was sort of a big thing, and even escalating into the 90s when you had things like Beast Wars. And I don't want to keep bringing this back to Transformers, because so much of my life does, but I mean, with things like Beast Wars and any 90s cartoon that had action around that time. I mean, when you had things like the anime boom, which kind of falls into that category of toys that were made to sell cartoons that were made to sell toys, and the anime boom. So it was kind of a double-jointed feeling in that. And of course you had the whole what is it, parents against children's media bullshit, where of course we wouldn't where parents would see these things and they'd demand that the violence be toned down and all that sort of thing. And you know, I can agree to disagree on that sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, it's not a good idea to show violence to children. But I think if the violence if the children don't go out and copy the violence, then who's it to blame? Is it the children or the program they're watching? And even and this isn't really even considered really a cartoon. I mean, if you look back on things like Power Rangers in the 90s, Power Rangers and all the amalgamations of clones that Saban, I won't say copied, but I mean those tokusatsu shows that were around during that time that Saban saw, and he made them into things like Master Rider, Big Bad Beetleborgs, something like that. Those aren't really considered cartoons, but they're action shows, they're action programming. And then here we head into the 2000s, where I think we see the action boom slowly begin to fade away in favor of live action shows being put on television shows like Cartoon Network and the Disney Channel, which the Disney Channel was never really a big part of my life, but I can faintly remember the Disney Channel in some way or another being having you know that problem. And then it was thanks to, we head into the 2010s where we have things like Adventure Time, which it really captured children's imagination and really took the world by storm. And this is here's the problem, I think, with a lot of with children's programming now. And I say this very loosely, so and I say this not in a way that children's entertainment today is bad, but there's something that I think is it's weaned too much on simplicity. There's this notion at the moment where children's entertainment, children's cartoons, it seems to revel in the idea of simplicity. And what do I mean by that? I'm not just necessarily talking about the stories. I'm not even necessarily talking about the notion to talk much about politics or gender politics or anything like that these days, because that's an entirely different issue, and I don't care that much about that issue, so I won't talk about that in any detail. But I mean, there's this really absurd notion to play safe in children's cartoons at the moment. Now, if you're the sort of person that grew up in the 80s and lived through the 90s, and you're now an adult in your 30s and your 40s, and you've lived long enough to see the evolution and the de-evolution of children's media, and see how that affects your life and the life of your child, you can notice that there's something really that there's something really simple about children's entertainment at the moment, and that's in two things. Number one is the art style, and this again falls back into the whole Gen Xer thing. With simplistic style, it falls into the whole area of, yeah, we got to make things simple because children's capacities to view things now are wacky and silly and energetic and frenetic and all that nonsense. And I can agree with you on that. And there's also the whole issue of simplistic stories, and this kind of ties back to the whole balance issue. There's at the moment, when it comes to balance, for children's entertainment today, there's this really absurd notion where we've got to have laid back, mellowed down. It's two things actually. It's laid back or mellowed down, or wacky and stupid juvenile humor. And there's that balance factor in those two cartoons, in those two cartoon elements, and you can pick this apart any way you want. But for me, I've noticed this with a lot of cartoons, and I'm very indifferent towards them, if I'm honest, because I'm not at that right mindset to bitch about these sort of things these days anymore, because there's so many different topics to talk about children's animation that but anyway, yeah, the simplified notion where, okay, we gotta have a simplified art style where everything has to be a bit more lighthearted and goofy, but at the same time simplified, and there's not much need for challenging, appealing art style, and instead everything has to be a more sugary coated, watered down, simple very simple art style, which I don't know. I mean, I'm opposed to, and there's also the whole issue of let's just have a simple, goofy, stupid cartoon, and let's have it very safe, and let's have it so where no one can complain about it. Let's have it where it's pandering to people and it's very politically correct. And with political correctness and how that shapes media at the moment, I think that's a subject that I really haven't. That's an entirely different subject, and I won't talk about that anymore, because otherwise I'll be standing on people's feet a little bit when talk about political correctness. But where I sit with children's entertainment is it can be it's a mix of two things and a decline of the other. The one being, let's make the cartoons a half and half, being the laid-back, simplified art style along with a wacky, goofy, stupid humor, and the other half being, which is it's still there, but it's not so much being there on a mainstream viewpoint of the action cartoons, which of course the action means let's make a cartoon designed to sell a toy, which any fucking toy manufacturer, whether it be Hasbro or Mattel or any of these big guys, will go ahead and say, let's excuse me, let's have a cartoon made to sell a toy. Which a lot of cartoons, some of the cartoons are in that viewpoint, that area, and with shows that kind of rely on the simple and the dumb. Simple and the dumb being the key point here, but I mean, they have good stories, but not a very interesting art style that kind of teeter on the verge of being bland and simple. And maybe, and this is a generational thing, because I'm not the biggest fan of simplicity. I think simplicity has to work for something that relies heavily on that. But something like Adventure Time, yeah, it works. Adventure Time has that simplified style that it has a very wacky, out there, absurd story, and it doesn't really need a highly detailed, borderline realistic look, which well, semi-realistic look, which a lot of the cartoons, which some of the cartoons of the past generation were, and that was made in an appealing sense, in the way that let's make something to make it, let's make something to sell a toy, which is the whole issue here. And with cartoons, I think today, see, I don't mind simplicity, and I'm not really a big fan of it, but I think simplicity has to be appeal to a cartoon that works. Adventure Time was one that I think worked very well, and but now it seems to be that there's no balance in children's entertainment at the moment, in things like Cartoon Network or channels like Disney, or even Nickelodeon, where the over-reliance on simplicity and silly humor seems to be the main focal point, and television shows that tell a really hard, gripping story that, yeah, at the same time you want to make that show to sell your product, isn't really there as much these days, and it's sort of been it's moved onto things like Netflix, where you have things like that recently ended. You had things like Voltron. You've got things like She-Ra now, which I'm not really a big fan of, but I know people really are quite crazy for that. And it's actually very daunting just to see the simplicity take over the challenging, because I think that we need challenging media, but at the same time that we need something different that doesn't just shove, you know, the same thing right in your face and say, here's the simple, here's the bland, let's revel in that, and let's not aim for challenge. Let's not aim for challenge and higher stakes. Try and interpret that any way you want. But I think for children's animation, especially with television now, and things that run on for about a 30-minute viewpoint, which is where this video is at, by the way, because I've been rambling this long. You know, if there has to be some balance. There has to be a balance between, okay, yes, you can have your mellow, simplified stuff, but at the same time, though, make something that's actually got some heart and some action, some story to it. Don't just rely heavily on this, because I think when you rely heavily on this, you make this feel like it's not important. And for me, I think that's what I think children really should be. You shouldn't give people what they want. You should give them what they need, and what they really need is something different, not just the same thing being the main focus. And with children's cartoons, with simple, laid back shit, which, and I say this not in a way that sounds aggressive, but I say this because I think that there's a need to have some. I mean, you can have silly and goofy and simple. You can have that. You are allowed to have that. But at the same time, there's got to be a balance between the action and adventure and the imagination, which is, you know, entertainment is a form of escapism, and you need that escapism to get away from what real life can hit you with. As tragic as that may be, but I mean, it's how I feel about it. And I think as we head further and further and further into the 21st century, we need to have a balance between, you know, the cartoons that are simple and dumb. Take that word whatever way you want and use that in your own way if you want. The simple and the dumb and the goofy lighthearted humor, but at the same time have something that's there to really take children on adventures, really send them on, you know, challenge their perceptions, challenge their notions, challenge, you know, question whatever you want, but at the same time don't make something that's there to just shove shit in your face. Because I think this is the problem now with the current climate of entertainment is, with the political and the gender movement, everything that's there, and I think that overshadows imagination. And I'm not saying that you can't have that, but at the same time, you can have that, but I mean, just be very minimalistic about it, and have something that's there to really send children on that imaginative exploration that really fires you up, and that really gets children's imagination fired up. I mean, I'm now in my 30s, and I still love stuff when I was a kid, and that's never going to change. And I think with children's entertainment now, and for me to go ahead and say, oh, it's really bad, it's awful, it's aimed for a younger audience, yeah, that's an entirely different issue altogether. But for me, I think that there has to be a balance. There has to be a balance in children's entertainment. There has to be. Don't just rely on the simple and the dumb. Rely too much. Don't rely too much on the simple and the dumb, but all at the same time rely on challenge. Rely on you know, making a show that really captures and reinforces a child's imagination and really sends them on an adventure to places that we had when we were children. And if you look at any Gen X cartoon, I mean, if you show, it doesn't really matter what they think of it. It really doesn't. I mean, okay, yeah, the art style might have been there at the time, but I mean, if you show a millennial something from a Gen X period, and immediately that's opened up to criticism, say, oh, well, the writing is goofy, the voice acting is goofy, and all that nonsense. I mean, that's going to be there regardless. But I mean, so what? I mean, you can look back on those shows and still share them around, and hopefully, you know, in future generations, those shows will still have an impact on future generations. Because I think that I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but I think the problem with children's cartoons at the moment, there's nothing really there to really challenge a child's imagination, and I think that the notion of playing it safe is the vocal point. I think that's such a bad, damaging thing. Don't rely too much on safety for children's entertainment. At the same time, don't show them something that's offensive, and view that any way you want. I mean, yeah, depending on what is offensive these days, and what people will hyperbolically explain as saying, oh, this is offensive, I don't want it. I mean, don't aim for simplicity, don't aim for the safe. And I think what the problem with children's entertainment, some children's entertainment today, is that there's too much reliance on playing it safe. There's too much reliance on pandering. There's too much reliance on reboots of things that have gone by, and there's too much reliance on stuff that is really dumbed down and really thin and really weak in its story and its animation. There needs to be a balance. There needs to be there needs to be some form of boundaries between the simplicity and the challenging. And simplicity and challenging don't go well together, and they don't. And there has to be two sides of the same thing. You can have one, but the other has to exist as well. And because I think that if you rely too much on one, you're overshadowing the other, and that damages television, that damages entertainment. Because there has to be something for whatever person wants to consume. If they don't like this, they can go like that. Or if they don't like this, they can go to that. And if they don't like that, they can move further afield. Because that's the good thing about entertainment, is that there's wide varieties of different things for anyone to consume. And if you don't like that, then I don't know. I mean, I'm overstretching the limit of this video here, but I mean, it's like, don't aim for simple, don't aim for simplicity, don't aim for too much of the simplicity. Aim for challenge, and aim for, I can't encourage this enough. Aim for challenging material. Demand better entertainment. Demand something that's really going to give you not necessarily what you want, but I mean what you really need out of entertainment. You need to go on an adventure. You need to have your mind, your perceptions explored. You need to have anything that's really going to shake up your imagination and really go, hey, you know, we need more of this. Why can't we make more? We need this kind of thing where it inspires us to make more. And I think that that's the problem with entertainment at the moment, is that there really is too much focus on the simple and the safe. So I guess what I'm trying to say with all this is that, yeah, nowadays there's a huge mix of I mean, children's entertainment has changed. The landscape is so much different now than it was back in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. There's so much change now that I think as we head further and further into the 21st century, there needs to be there needs to be something there for people to latch onto and say, we need creativity that is challenging, and we don't just need creativity that is simple. We don't need creativity that is simple. We need more of something that's challenging. We need challenging. We need media that's going to challenge our notions and really make us question things in the greater whole. And I think with children's entertainment, I really do think that there needs to be something there for children to latch onto, that at the same time isn't safe, but at the same time gets them ready for what's in store for their life down the line. And that's all I need to say on that. I've kind of stretched this video on a little bit longer, but fuck me, there's a lot to say. I can't go over this. I can't go over this subject enough without divulging into a long discussion. But I'm kind of going over the minute mark now. So let me wrap this up. That's kind of my whole take on this subject. If you want to respond to the video, it's down there below in the description bar. I'm not going to edit this. If you can kind of make sense of this ramble I've kind of made up for myself, really, form your own opinion, please. Because at the end of the day, you got to form your own opinion. But yeah, videos down below. Go watch it. Go respond to it if you want. I've said my piece. I'm out. See you soon, everybody.